folks, hey, it's David again on the Vintage Future. Welcome. Hey, today I just want to do a boot anatomy video. I want to talk about the different parts of the boot because when I was getting into boots, I made a lot of mistakes. There's a lot of things, people would say these terms on the internet for different parts of a boot, and I would have no idea what they're talking about. Or I would be confused because, you know, the internet's not exactly a regulated place, right? So you'd have people using all these different terms in different ways, and many of the people were correct, but many of the people were incorrect. And so I'd be confused, like, well, what does it actually mean? And so I just wanted to put this video out for you, especially for people who are just getting into this boot community, a video telling you what is what in boot anatomy. And who knows, maybe even if you've been in the boot world for a while, maybe this will help you and you'll learn some stuff, or maybe you've been using some terms wrong. So I'm by no means a pro. I'm not a cobbler or something like that. I don't make boots, so I'm not a pro, and this isn't exhaustive. I'm not going to hit every little thing conceivable. I'm going to miss things inevitably, but these are what I probably consider to be the basics, what every person should know about the different parts of a boot. Okay, so let's jump into boot anatomy. So we're going to start at the bottom. So this is the outsole. Most people are familiar with that. This particular one's called a day-night outsole. But regardless of what it is, whatever this bottom layer is, that's called the outsole. But the bottom of the heel here, this is called the top lift. Okay? So I've heard it called the heel pad before. The heel pad or the heel seat is actually what's inside, you know. But this right here is called the top lift. And each of these layers here in the heel, this is the heel, they're called lifts, okay, because it's just lifting the heel, all right? So that's nailed on, glued on. You got layers of veg tan leather here. I've heard people call it wood because it's very hard and it looks like wood, but this is actually leather. It's veg tan leather and it's pressed, so that's very hard and very dense. As far as heels go, this is what's called a block heel. This is a low block heel. A block heel is a heel that's just flat all the way down, so all the way around. So if you look at it like this, the back of it and the sides of it, they just go straight down, like the side of a building, like a skyscraper or something. It's called a block heel. Imagine just a rectangular block, a block of wood. It's just flat on all sides. And if you were to take a block of wood and shape it into the shape of a heel, you know, block heel. So hence the name. There's a couple other main kinds. There's a woodsman heel and a Cuban heel. Jake at Almost Vintage Style has done our community a great service by, you know, definitely beating that horse to death of constantly reminding people that a Cuban heel and a woodsman heel are not the same thing. And so what a woodsman heel is it's got this curve on the back. So it'll start here, right? And it kind of curves inwardly. So in a concave fashion, it curves in and then comes back out by the time it gets to the bottom. So it's like almost a cutout. It curves. It's got a very nice curvature to it, and that's true. Yeah, there's different designs, but usually it's true all the way around. It's not just the back. It's kind of got this curvature, inward curvature all the way around that heel. And a Cuban heel, otherwise known as a dogger heel, all the way around kind of just goes in. It just cuts in from here, from the top. It just cuts in at an inward angle, and the bottom of the heel ends up more in than the top. And a really sharp angle that's even sharper than that. It's the same idea, but it's even sharper as far as the back angle goes. So let's say a Cuban heel is like this. There's this other heel called a Packer heel that turns in even more at this super sharp angle. From here it goes, you know. So a Cuban heel, dogger heel, that's roughly what people are used to seeing on like a cowboy boot or western wear, right? There's variations of it, but those are the three main types of heels that you'll usually run into in this kind of footwear that I'm into. Block heels, Cuban/dogger heels, and woodsman heels. And then this is a full outsole, a full sole. It means that this rubber here goes all the way into the heel stack. That's why you see here there's this leather layer, and then you see the sole right there, and then 2 more layers of leather, and then the top lift. If you had a half sole, then this outsole would stop about right here, and in this little section here all the way across, you would just see leather. It's a half sole, 1/2, and then the heel. So that's that. Then you have this layer right here, this leather layer. This is called the midsole. All right. So that's just really another layer of the same leather that's in this heel stack. And what you can't see, and this is true of this particular boot, this is a Viberg 2030, and many other boots like it, is there's actually this very, very small cavity on the bottom side of this that's filled with cork. So if you were to open this boot up, what you would see this leather midsole is what it's called, this leather piece that you see that goes all the way across. You'd see this leather midsole, and then on the bottom side of it, it'd be filled in with this super thin layer of cork, and then on the top of that is where this rubber outsole goes. Now, even if this was a rubber, this outsole, if it was like another layer of leather, it's still called the outsole, okay, because it's the one on the outside. So heel, outsole, midsole, and what that cork in there does is it helps your foot make a shape, make an imprint in that midsole on the inside of the boot, because your foot is actually sitting on the top of the midsole inside the boot. And it molds to your foot that way a little bit better than if it was just leather, even though the leather will mold to your foot as well. And then you get this kind of custom fit once you break them in. But that's that so far. So there's different kinds of construction. This is called stitch down construction right here. It's where they take this top of the boot right here, and they kind of like fold out the sides of it and stitch that down through the midsole and the outsole. So I'll try to show that to you here. See how back here on the boot, it's just that lighter color leather where it's just the midsole. But then once you get up here, it's darker, the same color as this part of the boot, the uppers. Well, that's the stitch down flange that's stuck out, and they're stitched through that. So as you can see, there's 2 rows of stitching there. The one row goes through that flange of leather, through the midsole. And then the other one attaches all of it together. It goes through this leather, through the midsole, and all the way through the outsole, which is this stitch that you see here. As I said, this is stitch down construction because the outside of this vamp area is stitched down to the midsole. But some other kinds of common construction would be glued construction, where they literally just glue everything together. Pretty straightforward. Or also a Goodyear welt. A Goodyear welt, or a different kind of welt, is kind of hard to explain without a diagram. But essentially, there's this extra piece of leather that they use to connect the vamp to the sole and all that. And there's different methods of doing that. So I won't get into that. I'll leave that to someone more skilled with better illustrations than I. Suffice to say, in this community that has this kind of boot, the 2 main ones really are welting and stitch down. And then there's Blake stitch and veltashone and glued construction and a variety of other ones, Norwegian, so not going to get into that, but this one is stitched down. So that's that. So in general, when someone says the uppers of the boot, they're talking about all this leather up here. Technically speaking, with some companies, they're more just talking about this area, the shaft and everything up here, and not this sometimes, if they're being very technical. But really, if someone says, oh yeah, the leather uppers, they mean the whole thing. Now, this area right here is called the vamp. This whole front section is called the vamp. And then, of course, there's other jargon which is pretty intuitive, right? So this is the toe, obviously, this is the heel, okay, but some of the other pieces maybe aren't intuitive to you. And this area is often called the waist, or the arch area. And then instep, as we talked about, this is the ball. Okay, the ball is technically the widest part of the last. Okay, the last is the shape that the boot is built upon. So they take this big wood or plastic thing that's shaped like a foot and they stretch this leather over it. And that's the lasting process, the shaping process, if you will. So again, heel, waist, and arch. Instep, ball. From this side, ball, and toe box. These particular boots, and as I said, these are Viberg 2030s. These are created to be kind of one piece. Okay, so what I mean is, this is a cap toe, as I said earlier. So what that doesn't mean, it doesn't mean that this is a plain toe boot and then they take a whole other separate piece of leather for the cap toe and put it over the top and sew it on. So you're not getting like an extra layer of leather. Okay, what this is essentially one leather layer comprised of two pieces, and there's a seam right here. So this is just as thick as this. This is one layer of leather, this is one layer of leather, and this is the seam that joins the two together. Now there's a vamp lining inside that makes the whole thing thicker, but essentially the outside of this vamp, this upper, is one layer of leather. In many heavy-duty work boot companies, like in the Pacific Northwest, they have a different kind of construction called multi-panel construction, and they put the boot together in such a way where they can replace any given part of the vamp or the upper without ruining the rest of the boot. What that means is, in a situation like this, it would actually, instead of being one leathered layer across, this would be a plain toe boot, and then they'd go and add a whole extra layer of leather over the top of it to make the cap toe. And that way, if you wore through that cap toe, you literally just take that piece of leather off and throw it out and get a new one and sew it right back onto the top. Instead of where is this one, you know, if you wore through it, you'd be wearing through to the inside of the boot, to the vamp lining. And, you know, conceivably you could replace this as well. If you really knew what you were doing, right? Because you could just undo this seam, and but it'd be very difficult because then you're really deconstructing the whole boot, like the vamp lining and everything. It gets really hairy. So a lot of those boots that are more heavy-duty workwear, or I don't know a lot about this, but old militaria from like the First World War or whatever, that have nail-down construction. It's not even like stitched the way we think of. It's like the sole's literally nailed on. A lot of that was created so that, you know, as your boots and shoes got damaged in war or work or firefighting or something like that, you know, you could take the boot to someone nearby that knew what they were doing, and they could just take the bad part, throw it out, replace it real quick, and you're back in business. And so this is not multi-panel construction. This is just a single piece. These sections right here, this section right here, this is called a quarter. So these are called quarters. And this part right here where you see these holes, this is the eye stay. Okay, and these little metal holes, these are called eyes or eyelets. Sometimes you'll see more of a hook. Those are just called hooks. All right. Now, there's two kinds of eyelets, two main kinds anyways. So these you'll see are nice and round on the inside, just like on the outside. And so that's just kind of a regular eyelet. Or sometimes you'll just see them called stamped eyelets or something like that. There's another kind where on the inside here, you see all these teeth. It's like once it's stamped, all these like teeth fold out. Well, that's called, some people call it a star eyelet, but it's really called an anchored eyelet. That's more secure, technically, so that's why you usually see that on work boots, not this kind. But it doesn't mean that this kind is cheap or will fall out or something like that. These are plenty hardy. You just wouldn't necessarily want those if you're subjecting your boots to the most rugged conditions, like you're a firefighter or you're on a demolition crew or something like that. That's why you see work boots usually have those anchored eyelets. So anyways, as I said, quarter eye stays. These are eyes or eyelets or hooks. This is the tongue, just like on sneakers. This is still called the tongue. Okay, and there's different kinds of tongues. This one is partially gusseted. What that means is it's sewed onto the inside of the quarters right here. Okay, so as you can see right here, this one's sewed at about the 4th eyelet. Okay, so inside the shaft here, this is stitched on right at about here. When you hear someone say that's a non-gusseted tongue, it means it's not attached on the inside except for right here. So it's basically just a piece of leather flopping around, and it's just sewed on right here across what's called the instep. Okay, that's a non-gusseted tongue. A fully gusseted tongue would be sewed all the way up to here. It'd be attached here. Okay, so you couldn't do this with the tongue. It'd be just stitched solid all the way up like this. Okay, so that would be a fully gusseted tongue. So this is a partially gusseted tongue right here. And let's talk about the toe, and then we'll talk about the heel. Okay, so as I said, this is the vamp. This area is called the instep. Really, this isn't called the instep on a boot, but your foot, that part of your foot, is called your instep. So when someone says the instep area, you know, they're talking about that part that goes across the top of your foot. All right. This is the toe box. So they'll call it toe sometimes toe box. And sometimes there's structure in it. The structure is either called structure to hold the toe up, or sometimes it's called a toe puff. All right. So this has a partial structure. It means it is structured, but it's kind of soft. You can push it down a little bit. This one is what they call ping pong. It's like roughly the same thermoplastic that you would use to make a ping pong ball, where you can press down on it and it has some shape recovery, right? But it's at the same time kind of hard, but a little bit elastic. So it doesn't matter what it's made out of, though. It could be a leather toe puff. It could be a thermoplastic toe puff. It could be celastic, which is a kind of fabric, which is impregnated with this like hardening adhesive stuff. Anyways, a dipped fiberglass, right? It could be metal. Anyways, there's different kinds of toe puffs, also called a toe structure, but they're all still called a toe puff or toe structure. And then obviously there's like safety toes, like steel toe boots. That's a little bit different, but essentially it does the same thing, but there's also a protection factor there. Okay, this is called a cap toe. See the stitching right here? This is a cap toe. If there was nothing like this, just a regular shoe, you know, just think your typical dress shoe, it'd just be what's called a plain toe. It'd just be one layer of leather. All right. Now let's look at the back of the boot. This is the heel. Now, there's different ways to do this. So I'll just deal with this way and then talk about some of the other ways you'll see this done. Okay, so this whole area is called the heel. This area in specific can be called the heel pocket. Another name for it is the heel cup. All right. This is not the heel counter, okay? The heel counter is technically the piece inside here. There's this little leather or sometimes plastic piece that fits inside here that gives this heel its structure, that gives your heel, when you put your foot in it, some support. It kind of sucks your heel into place and wraps around the back of your heel right there. And it offers a little bit of physical protection as well. That piece of leather or plastic that's inside here is called the heel counter. The whole area, though, is the heel pocket or the heel cup. And this piece of leather right here, this one single piece that goes across the back that holds it in, it's called a heel stay. Some people call it the back stay as well, but that's that. Now that's because this is what's called an external heel counter. What that means is these two pieces right here, the quarters, right? Well, they wrap around the back of the boot and they sew together like this, okay? So when you look inside this boot here, you'll see like stitching that goes right up the middle in the back, okay? That is these two quarters being stitched together in the back. So an external heel counter means they take that heel counter, this one's hard leather, and they put it right over the top of that. And then to hold that heel counter in place, they put this heel stay, this strip of leather, right over the top of it, and then they sew it on. Okay. If it was an internal heel counter, what you would have these two quarters right here. They'd come across the back. They'd sew together. All right. And then the only thing you'd see on the outside, instead of this big heel stay, you just see what's called a back strip. It'd be a strip. See this right here? It'd be like that, but it'd be like that all the way down. And all this material here wouldn't be there because you'd just be looking at the quarter itself. So there'd just be a back strip covering up that seam where the quarters sew together. And then on the inside, they'd put the heel counter. And to cover it up, they'd put what's called lining. So if someone's talking about boot lining or shoe lining, they take another leather, usually some kind of calf leather or something like that. Some really soft kind of thin leather. It's very supple and luxurious. And they line the inside of the boots with it. See, this is just one layer of leather. These boots are unlined. It means this is just one piece of leather. So this and this are just two sides of the same piece of leather. But when you have lining, you have this, which everyone sees, and on the inside, another piece of softer leather sewed to it. And on something with an internal heel counter, that will cover up that heel counter on the inside, so that on the outside of the boot you just see this nice quarter that goes all the way to here on both sides, and then a back strip that goes all the way down, this strip of leather. And then you look on the inside and all you see is just a bunch of lining. You wouldn't even know that the counter is there. So then, there's inserts, or some people call them insoles. I made these. I bought some White Cloud leather insoles with cork, and this looks pretty mangled, but I just cut them because I wanted them to be 3/4 because they just needed a little spacer. But something like this would be called an insert. You could even call it an insole. And then in here, there's basically what's on where the heel is, and it ends about right here. It doesn't go all the way to the toe. It's basically leather with foam inside. It's kind of a pad for your heel, and so many will call that the heel pad. You'll also hear it called a heel seat, or some people would call that the insert. Because it's technically an insert as well. It's just glued in. It's not an integral part of the boot. You can replace those. You can take them out, or you can add to them. And then the rest of what your foot is sitting on is actually this midsole here, but on the inside of the boot. And then this vamp area, all this right here, is lined on the inside. Not with a soft calf lining like I was talking about here. It's a more dense veg tan leather, but you can use all kinds of different leathers. Some people use Chrome XL or Chrome Tan leather of a different kind. But anyways, it's typically very dense. Sometimes it's like hot steamed or something like that. And it's just meant to make for a smooth fit and give a little bit of extra structure to this area so it kind of keeps its shape more, among some other things I'm probably not even privy to because I'm not a boot or shoemaker. Often this section right here is called the collar, right? So there's different ways to do that. This is a cut top collar. So it's just rough right on the edges here. It looks like as if you just cut it, right? There's also a roll top, rolled edges, right? So this will come up, and they take a little piece of leather and they kind of roll it over the edge. It's almost like a bevel or a bead that goes all the way around. Okay, and then there's a few other ones as well. They're mostly stylistic. Most of them have no functional purpose. The last thing we need to talk about is the shank and the arch support. So I can't really show you what that looks like here. The best thing to do is to go and look at a Rose Anvil video or something like that on YouTube where he cuts the boots in half and you can really see it. But somewhere right in here where the arch of your foot is, there's often some kind of arch support. This boot and a lot of other boots don't actually have much in the way of arch support, but some companies will add some extra plastic or leather or something. It's a little bit of a hump or a bump right where the arch of your foot would be. And that's just to kind of support that arch. It's very comfortable, and it, especially after breaking it in. Sometimes it's not comfortable when you're breaking it in, but ultimately it becomes comfortable, and it evenly distributes the weight across your foot and helps your foot keep its shape, which, especially if you're doing heavy lifting and stuff like that, mainly if you're doing a lot of strenuous activities, that will bode well for the health of your back and your knees and all that in the long term. Whereas if you're just kind of walking around, sitting around in an office, it doesn't really matter as much. But then on the inside of the boot, at roughly this location here, in order to give this boot a little extra support for your foot, there's something called a shank. And it's just this little rectangular piece. It's just a couple inches long, a few inches long, maybe 3 inches, 2.5 inches, 2 inches, something like that, right? It can be made out of different things. It can be made out of wood, like in these particular boots, or it could be made out of metal, and that's what Viberg used to use. Or it could be made out of fiberglass or really hard leather. There's all kinds of things you can use, and really all it's meant to do, like I said, is just give that extra support and structure to the boot. So that's it, guys. That's pretty much all I know about the different parts of a boot. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was informative. If I said something that wasn't quite right, like you're a cobbler or something out there, somebody that definitely is more qualified to talk about this than me, comment. I'd love to know. This is so we can all learn. I'd really rather not add any information out there on the internet that is incorrect, because that's kind of the opposite of why I do these videos. I do these videos so that we can get more accurate information out there. So I've learned all this by doing my research really thoroughly over the past months and years, and so I think most of it's pretty accurate. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. I hope the video helped you, and as I always say, make sure your boots take you to places more important than the boots themselves. Have a great day, guys. Talk to you later. Bye.